You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 134. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Can you believe it? We are almost at the end of 2023. I don't know about you, but it feels like this year went by so very quickly. In today's podcast episode, what I would love to do with you is to go through a list of the lessons that I have learned over the course of the year. It's a process of reflection. I love to do this as I'm closing a chapter, whether it's a year or a project or a phase of life, to reflect on the things that went well, lessons that I learned, maybe some of the things that didn't go so well. And I'd really love to share that with you. When I'm approaching the end of something, I'm also thinking about the beginning of the next thing. And my guess is that you may be too. 2024 is around the corner. And as you know, there's always so much hype about a new year, a fresh start, a clean slate, the promise of all things. And I'm very much on board with that as well. And so before we dive into our episode today, I'd like to extend an invitation to a webinar that I will be putting on a couple of days from now, Friday, December 15th at noon Pacific time. And we are going to get together and create a plan for sustainable success in 2024. If this is something that appeals to you, please do register. If you can't attend live, register anyways, and I'll send you the link. It's time for us to get together to reflect on some of our wins and maybe some challenges from 2023. And what I'd love to help you do is set yourself up for 2024. What I would invite you to consider is how you can make 2024 an exceptional year for yourself. Maybe it's the year that you finally tackle that project that you've been dreaming about. Maybe you make some changes that you've been wanting to make for a while. Whatever your goals look like for you, I would love to have the opportunity to support you in creating a blueprint, a roadmap, getting some of the groundwork ready before this year wraps up so that when the clock strikes 12 on January 1st, you feel settled, you feel calm, you feel grounded, and you feel ready to move into that new year with your goals clear in your mind. Now, you probably also know, because I've been talking about it on the podcast quite a bit in the past few weeks, that I will be offering a group coaching and mastermind program also starting in January. I don't know why I said also. The webinar is December 15th of this year. January is the new year, and it is the start of a 6-month program that I will be offering for women lawyers. The group itself will be capped at 8 lawyers. And the reason for that is to have that more intimate setting. And what we're going to do is spend 6 months together focusing on a goal that you choose for yourself. So if you come to the webinar and you decide on a goal and you like my style and you think this would be fun to do alongside others, then maybe that's something that you'll sign up for. There's no obligation, obviously, and I won't spend too much time on the webinar talking about it. So what I would love to offer to you, though, is that this is an opportunity to really dive into something that matters to you. In the 6 months that we have together, we go step by step, month by month through different themes. And these are themes that tend to show up anytime you create a goal and then you go in pursuit of that goal. So we start out in January and we set a goal, right? We get really granular about what that goal is going to look like. We get specific. We think about the action steps necessary to create that goal, what it's going to look like. And I have a framework that I offer for doing that. You may already be familiar with that framework. It's in podcast episode 6, I believe, the Great Goal Framework, but we dive into that and you get to apply that to the goal that you select for yourself. In February, we move beyond setting that initial goal and look more at the who. versus the how. So who do you need to become in order to achieve your goal? And this really goes into self-concept work, really thinking about how you see yourself and how that's creating an impact in your practice. In March, we turn to obstacles. Now, what you may know from experience is that whenever you set a goal for yourself, immediately the obstacles start to present themselves in the way. It has been said that what stands in the way is the way, which is one of the reasons that obstacles are so fascinating. And so we spend the month of March learning how to deal with obstacles, how we can learn to really embrace them and move through them. In April, we then look at confidence, authority, and power. This is a really interesting experience because what I invite you to do in that month is to ask yourself what would be different for you if you felt fully 100% in confidence, authority, and power. And it's pretty remarkable in terms of the shifts that can happen when you do that. When we get to the month of May, we start talking about boundaries. So what you need to put into place to protect the things that matter most to you. And then finally, as we wrap up in June, we'll be talking about creating sustainable success. So we take all the work you've done in the first 5 months, and then we set you up for success over the long run. Now, I also offer 2 bonus courses. One of them is transitions. I have experienced that many of my clients are going through some sort of a transition, whether it is a classic job A to job B type of transition, or whether it's a transition where you stay in place, but something within you or your practice is going to shift. And I also do a bonus course on time management, and I tailor the course to suit the needs of the individuals in the course. So I've offered the 6-month program a couple of times, and each time it's a little bit different because I'm building on past experience, and I'm also responding to the needs and interests of the women who are in the group. So if that's something that appeals to you, by all means, please do reach out to me if you have any questions. Now, I've also had lawyers express interest in having members of their law firm participate, and I have had lawyers who are part of firms. Often they are part of firms who join the program. If it's something that you'd like to offer separately, if you'd like to set up a private group where you go through this process or a similar process, please do let me know, because that is also something that is very doable. And I think having that collaboration of team players with each other, each focusing on a goal, could be really, really impactful. And so if that's on your mind, by all means, please do reach out. Now, with that, I'm going to turn to today's episode, which is, of course, the lessons learned in 2023. And I have many, many, many lessons that I learned this year. I've narrowed it down to 7 for the purpose of today's podcast episode. So I'm going to dive straight in with lesson number 1. And the first lesson is that there is a reward for taking risks. And when it comes to taking risks, even really small ones will add up over time. Now, when I look at this from a personal perspective, I will tell you that this mastermind and group coaching program that I started offering in 2023, that is probably the shift or the risk, if you will, that I took this year that separated me from previous years. As you know, I started this podcast a few years ago. That felt like a really big move, and now I'm a lot more comfortable with it. But initially it was quite scary. And so, that's been a previous year risk. This year it was creating a group. And what I can tell you is that I'm so glad that I did it. From the perspective of the person leading the group, it was certainly intimidating to create it and offer it to the world and see if there would be lawyers who wanted to sign up and join me on this process. And there were lawyers who wanted to do that. And so I've been delighted to have 2 incredible groups, 8 women each, who have come with me on this journey, and stepping into that role and really needing to step into a leadership role when it came to leading these groups has been, frankly, transformational for me as a coach. And so the reason I share that with you as something that stands out for me is that it was something that I had wanted to do for some time. It took me a while to raise myself to the comfort levels or the tolerance of discomfort levels to do it. And in hindsight, I'm just so glad that I've done it, that I've started it. And now I see how I can build on the work that I'm doing on myself, build the skills that I have, and I want to create more of this. I want to create more opportunities for community, more opportunities for connection, more opportunities for lawyers to follow along in a sense in a program that I'm offering, but most importantly, learn for themselves and learn to support each other and learn to see that they are not alone. None of you is alone on your journey. We're all in this together. And so to foster communities where I make that tangible and accessible is something that I am committed to continuing to do. So for each of you, I would invite you to think about where in your practice or outside of your practice this year you have taken on a risk, where you've done something that was beyond your comfort levels and how that helped you grow. Now, if I look at clients that I've worked with, I've seen some incredible transformations, and I've had my lawyer clients who have started their own practice, who have moved away from private practice and created a business. Clients who have decided that they are going to take a firmer role as a leader, where they're having really difficult conversations, where they're asking people to do things even though it feels uncomfortable. I've had clients who have grown their practice while transforming the relationship that they have with themselves. And to do that, sometimes the risk was not necessarily taking on more, but taking on less. And so for each of you, I would invite you to think about what the risks are that you have taken on, some of the rewards that you have experienced as a result, and how those risks and how those rewards and how that growth is setting you up for the next level of whatever it is that you're setting out to do in 2024. For myself, when I think about how this is setting me up for next year, I'm thinking about how I want to set my practice up in a way that is really welcoming, in a way that allows me to create more programs, in a way that allows me to coach more lawyers and create really amazing, incredible experiences for everybody who I have the benefit, the pleasure, the gift of working with. Number 2. So number 1 was the reward for taking risks, no matter how small that risk may be. Number 2 is to give yourself time to work on your practice as well as working in your practice. So one of the things that I did this year was create a very full practice. It has been an incredible year from a coaching and connecting and working with lawyers perspective. As you know, I have a coaching practice, so I've been continuing to do my one-to-one coaching. I have been continuing to engage in speaking. So whether that's at law firms or bar associations or other organizations, I've been doing that, speaking about coaching and coaching relating topics. And I've been offering my group coaching and mastermind programs. And so that's what I've been doing as a coach. In addition to that, I've also been doing a fair amount of work with a law firm where I used to work to help support their lawyers and students and associates. And that has been really rewarding, really fulfilling. I've enjoyed that a lot. I've been helping out while one of their professional development person has been away on a leave. And so that's been really great. And I've also continued to do my nonprofit work with the People's Law School, producing webinars. So as you can imagine, I've had sort of these 3 different focus points. And what has been amazing is just how much I've been able to engage in each of those spheres and how much I love the work that I've been doing. Where the lesson has been drawn is that I think what I have not given myself enough of this year is reflection time. So I've really been in action mode for pretty much the entirety of 2023. It has been a very busy year. And so what I'm planning to do in 2024 is allow myself a little bit more space to plan. So that is why I think it's important for us to have moments where we step back and plan our year. So this webinar on the 15th may be an opportunity for you to do something like that, where you step away from your practice and you think about it. You think about what you want to create as opposed to being in it and doing the work itself. So I've been taking little pockets here and there to start designing some plans for myself. And what is going to happen in the new year is that I will have a little bit more time to do that planning. And so with the podcast, for example, I have some guests that I'm dying to bring on. I just haven't really had the time this year to make those plans. So that's going to happen. That's something that will impact you as a listener. And I will also continue to kind of plan out how it is that I want to structure my practice. So for you, I would invite you to think about where in your practice you might want to take a step back and think about what might be different for you. So that might be more deliberate planning, not just that day to day, right? I mean, that's something that I absolutely do consistently. I'm very much tied to my calendar and planning. And I can tell you at this stage, sometimes I'm planning my day several times in a day just to keep myself focused on accomplishing all the tasks that are on my to-do list. So that might be part of your practice. It might also be that taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture. What do you want to accomplish over the year, over the next 2 or 3 years, next 5 years? And it's interesting when I coach my clients on those questions, those longer out 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10-year plan questions, a lot of lawyers get stuck. And it's understandable because it's a very different way of thinking about your practice, especially if you're very much caught up in the minutia of the day to day. So that's a lesson that I learned this year and one that may also be applicable to you, right? What is it that you can be doing in your practice to work on your practice versus in your practice? And one lawyer that I spoke to years ago offered a rule of thumb. I think he said something like 80-20, 20% of your time you may want to spend planning, 80% you want to spend executing. So whatever ratios may resonate with you, you might think about how to incorporate that in your practice. So that brings us to lesson number 3. This is one I've experienced, and it's a theme that I've noticed among coaching clients. And that is that children, so for all of you who are listening, who have young families or school-aged children, even older children, right? I mean, I don't think that children, I don't know yet because my kids are 9 and 11, so I can't speak to what happens when they're teenagers or young adults. But this idea that children and professional work and balancing or juggling, or however you want to describe that verb, the way that you connect or relate the two to each other, there's a different threshold, there's a different balance, there's a different juggle for everybody. And for everybody, the choice needs to be one that resonates with them. So let me give you a bit more context to that. I've got lawyer clients who have made choices in our coaching work to focus more on family and put off, delay, not pursue professional goals at this time in order to serve their families. So the reason that I am identifying this as a lesson learned for 2023 is that it's a struggle that is so real for so many working parents, not just the moms, but the dads too. If you're not a parent, you may have this show up in some other way, right? It doesn't need to be kids. Kids, I think, are so clear because when you have a child, you kind of have that accepted buy-in that if your child is sick and you need to go pick them up, nobody really questions it. And yet there may be something in your life, if you don't have kids, that's really important to you, where you feel awkward trying to assert that boundary or protect that interest because it's not necessarily recognized as valuable to society, to your organization, whoever it is that you're basically trying to set a limit with. So for all of you who are juggling, who are making choices where you're looking at your professional work and you're looking at your life outside of work and you're trying to figure out where to draw the line. Where do you want to tip the balance? Where do you want to be spending more of your time? How are your resources being expended? Are you giving yourself capacity to have a life outside of the office, or vice versa? Are you more engaged in family work and what you really want is to spend a bit more time at the office? There is no right or wrong, and you can love all of these things and still struggle. In fact, I think the more you love them, the more you're going to struggle. And so the reason I'm mentioning this as a lesson is that for each of us, the experience is unique. It depends on your professional work, your job, the expectations, the hours, the stress, the clients, the setup. I mean, there's so many factors to consider. Is it working remotely? Is it working in an office? I mean, all the different pieces. What is your partner doing? How many children are there? Do your children have needs that are special and different from maybe the needs of other children? And so there's all these factors that come into play, and there is no one right way to do this. And I need to remind myself this myself, and I see it in others. So I think this is a really strong message for all of us to bear in mind when we are making those difficult decisions, when we're choosing one and feeling like we're choosing it over something else, to really own those decisions and to allow ourselves the grace and to feel confident that we are making the right choices for us, even if it's maybe not the same choice that somebody else would be making, and even if it means that sometimes we're going to have to slow down professionally or make sacrifices on the home front. These are choices that we are all allowed to make. Now, number 4 is you don't need to be perfect. You just need to show up. So I've probably said this before on the podcast or some version of this, and I can tell you that I kind of have a little bit of a relationship with perfection or perfectionism, and it kind of ebbs and flows. I would say that particularly since becoming a parent and just realizing how much more in my life I have to just go with the flow. I just have to roll with it, and things aren't perfect. And also, as I've gone deeper into my coaching practice, I think I've developed a lot more compassion for myself and for others. And so my attachment to perfection is probably a lot less tight than it was when I was younger. And so what I find probably the biggest difference is that I'm willing to show up even when I don't feel like it's perfect, even when I feel like I could have prepared more. This podcast episode today is a testament to that. I feel like if I had more time available, maybe I could make it better, more organized. I could make it punchier. I could come up with a better list. I don't know. I mean, there's always going to be that voice inside of us that tells us it can always be better. And what I've noticed is that the alternative to not showing up, right? If we choose not to show up because it's not perfect, we never get the chance to grow, and we never get the chance to put our work out into the world. And what I've learned is that just by showing up, even if it's not as perfect as I wish it would be, it's still good enough. It's still work that can help impact somebody else. I can still help somebody even if I'm not showing up perfectly. And so I would invite you to think about that as it applies to you as well, where there may be areas in your life where you're talking yourself out of doing something because it won't be perfect. It won't be as polished as you wanted. And yet by showing up, you're offering a gift to others. You are allowing others to learn from you, to connect with you, to learn what it is you do. And so that would be my takeaway from lesson number 4, which would be to show up even when it's not perfect. The other cool thing about this, I was chatting with a client today who was talking about, it's a personal project. She's in my mastermind program. And so she's got a project that she's been working on, and she's kind of getting ready to put that project out into the world. And what's really interesting is that it's required a lot of content creation. And she recently started working with a client who is looking for that type of support. And so what you might find is that by preparing yourself in one area, whether it's speaking or getting involved in a new practice area or putting yourself out there for a new job opportunity, even if you don't get the exact result that you want, or you're not even finished with your goal that you're working toward, just the fact that you are creating and putting yourself out there readies you for a next opportunity that may very well be coming your way. So just to recap, 1 to 4, we've got number 1 is you will be rewarded for taking risks, small risks and larger risks, and the small ones will add up. Number 2 is to give yourself time to work on your practice as well as in your practice. Number 3 is to kind of allow and give yourself grace for whatever balance you choose to have between your children and your professional work. And if it's not your children, then it's whatever else may be really important to you that you feel is difficult almost to justify making time for outside of work. Number 4 is that you don't need to be absolutely perfect. You just need to show up. So I've got 3 more to share with you, 3 more lessons from 2023. Number 5 is that change itself is hard, but the underlying push is asking for your attention, and it will continue to ask for your attention until you address it. Now, I see this in areas of my own life. I see this in areas of my clients' lives. When somebody comes to me, I think probably the most common example is when someone is in a job and they know they want to leave, and yet they've been there for a number of years. They've built really close relationships. They like so much in it. They feel like it's a great job. Why would they want to leave it? Maybe people close to them tell them that they'd be crazy to leave it. Why don't you just stay where you are? So there's this feeling of being in a place where, it looks good. I did a podcast last week about things looking good on the outside, but feeling not so great on the inside. And that's a classic example of that. And yet and if you've had this experience, then you know this, when you stay there, it's almost as though, it doesn't really change. It doesn't really get better. And you develop this dialogue with yourself, right? Things will get better if I just hang on another year, if I just wait for my bonus, if I just wait for the composition of the group to change. I mean, there's all of these promises that we can make to ourselves about how things could be different. And the trouble there, of course, is that if it doesn't change, if something doesn't dramatically change, then we continue to disappoint ourselves. So the lesson here, and it's one that I think is ongoing, I think it applies to all of us, anyone who's really contemplating a change that involves kind of doing something that would be really difficult, right? Going through the discomfort of changing the status quo is, number one, sometimes it's a call to growth, right? Sometimes you have this feeling like you need to move towards something that where you are is limited and it's not enough, and that you need to move forward for yourself. And so there's that calling. It may be a calling toward a particular practice area or calling toward a different way of working. Sometimes it's a call to pull you outside of law into something different or pull you into business. I mean, there's all these different areas where you might feel that calling. And so to change means to learn how to recognize and then respond to that call. Sometimes change can be motivated by pain, right? You're increasingly uncomfortable where you are, and you keep telling yourself this, right? There's that internal dialogue of, when are we going to do it differently? When are we going to do it differently? And when you decide that you're going to start taking action on that, it can really impact the relationship that you have with yourself. You may now see yourself almost as listening to that voice more instead of kind of stuffing it away, saying, no, we'll get back to you another day. So in either of these cases, right, or it might be a combination of both, right? A call towards something different, a push away from something that is causing pain. And what I can offer here is that sometimes it takes time to be able to respond to that, right? Whether it's the pull or the push, sometimes it truly does take time. You need to almost process what is about to happen. Sometimes you might need to grieve the loss of a particular situation that you may find that you really love, but is no longer right for you. And what I will also offer is that sometimes it means that you are on the verge of a breakthrough. And by breakthrough, what I mean is when you make a change that profoundly shapes or reshapes or alters your self-concept, who you are, right? It means changing something about yourself. And that breakthrough can be really challenging. And yet it also, on the other side of it, opens you up to the possibility of stepping into a whole other plane in your life, right? Whether this is a professional goal or a personal goal, it's stepping into almost like a new identity. And so where you have this lingering desire for change, what I've noticed is that it doesn't really go away until it's been addressed. And once you have addressed it, there is something freeing and liberating and very expansive on the other side of it. Now, number 6 is the lesson here is to reach out for support. Now, I think for many of us, myself included, there's this feeling of wanting to do things on our own, really stand on our own 2 feet. We are strong, we are capable, and so we should do it. You might feel like you're capable, you can take it, you don't want to impose that on others, and so you continue to shoulder the burden. And what I'm offering to you is that sometimes it helps just to get someone else involved. I was thinking about my grandmother. Both my grandmothers were exceptional. My paternal grandmother was interesting because she lived by herself well into her 90s. And I remember when she was 93 years old, my father and his sister were kind of, having some difficulties because my grandmother lived alone. She had some stairs down into the basement where the laundry machine was located. And so they were worried about her going up and down the stairs, carrying these heavy loads of laundry. And was she going to trip and fall? And, I think I inherited some of that gene, right? This idea that you just want to do it yourself. And in a sense, there's something really enlivening about doing that, about having challenges, even if it's carrying laundry up the stairs when you're 93 years old. I think there's something very invigorating about doing things on your own. And yet at the same time, this year, I certainly started to see the limits of not bringing other people in to help. And so for all of you, if you maybe struggle with that same thing where you don't necessarily want to ask for help, the lesson I'm pulling from this and a change that I'll be making, I've already started making it, but more so in 2024, is to really assemble a team of support around me so that I feel like I'm not alone in certain things that I'm doing. So I've started doing that, and I can tell you it feels a lot better. And so for each of you, I would invite you to do the same. Now we are at our final lesson number 7, and that is focus on building self-trust. So this is a theme that you've probably noticed if you've listened to this podcast more than once. I often come back to self-trust. This is something that I've been working on for myself for many years, particularly since really diving into the world of coaching and the coaching that I do with my clients, the coaching that I do myself. I love working with coaches. I find it can be so impactful. It really helps me to figure out where I want to go and to identify some of the blind spots that I have for myself. And self-trust is one of those areas where I don't think it's that hard to get disconnected. I think when we are living in a society like we do, we're kind of exposed to all these ideas and images of what perfection looks like, about what, a working mom should be like, how your career should be perfect, your kids should be perfect, your house should be perfect, you should be perfect. There's a lot of outside imagery and societal pressures to do things a certain way. Professionally, even when I was practicing, I found, sometimes it was really hard for me to trust my judgment, right? I would be working alongside lawyers who had way more experience than I did. And so even when I was closer to the problem, sometimes I would think, well, they have 20, 30 years of experience more than me, so they must know best. And what I've come to learn is that, in fact, we are the closest to the problem. Like when we are assigned a task or when we are working on something, there's so much more to an analysis, and we know so much more than we sometimes give ourselves credit for. I'm sure you've had that experience where you've been working with a really senior lawyer. I had a conversation like this recently with a lawyer who is, I don't know, maybe a 15-year call. And she was saying how, she was pretty convinced that the answer was X, and a more senior lawyer challenged that. And initially she doubted herself, right? Well, he must be right because he's got 30 years more experience, whatever that happened to be. And in the end, she was right. And I know I've certainly had that experience back when I was practicing law. And so what I invite you to think about is how sometimes you may be almost giving somebody else authority or deferring to somebody else. And in a way, what I think is, at least the lesson that I'm pulling, is to learn to trust myself more. So that means listening to myself. That means noticing how I'm feeling about things. It means keeping my promises to myself as much as I'm keeping my promises to other people. And sometimes I really slip up. I did that today. Not accidentally, but somebody reached out about something and I booked a call with them. And today is probably not the best time, but I really wanted to do it. And so now I'm kind of having to remind myself, Paula, next time this comes up, please be more disciplined about saying no and scheduling that call on another day. So these things will come up, but the trick here is noticing and developing that relationship with yourself, developing that self-trust so that you know that you can count on yourself to follow through on the commitments that you make to yourself. I think it also means that when things don't go well, instead of blaming ourselves or feeling really ashamed for not being perfect or having anticipated every possible scenario, it's having that compassion. It's giving ourselves compassion. It's approaching the question with curiosity without judging ourselves, and allowing ourselves to feel the way that we feel and moving forward from there. So that last lesson, that lesson of self-trust, is one that is ongoing and one that I continue to work on professionally and personally. So that is my list of lessons for 2023. Just another quick recap is, number 1 is that there is a reward for taking risks, whether those are really small risks or larger ones. Number 2 is making that time to work on your practice. So giving yourself that space and time to think forward in terms of what it is that you would love to create in your practice in the next year, in the next few years. something that is expansive and gives you a vision to work toward. And if you're looking for what kind of ratio, again, I kind of threw out that number of 80-20. It doesn't have to be that number specifically, but are you carving out opportunities to think about your practice, think on your practice as well as in your practice? Number 3 is to allow yourself to make choices between your professional work and your children or other components of your life that really matter to you, and to feel good about those choices, right? At the end of the day, this is your life. And so you get to pick what ratio or what balance or juggle or integration works best for you, and to feel confident and sound and grounded in that decision that you make for yourself. There is no right or wrong. Number 4 is, again, that you don't need to be perfect. You just need to show up. And so hopefully that's liberating for any of you who really want it to be A+ every single time. It doesn't need to be A+. It doesn't. Number 5 is that change itself can be really difficult. It can be really, really hard to navigate, to go through. And yet that underlying push or that underlying pull is there for a reason. And if you allow yourself to follow it, so sometimes that's going to take you time, what you might find is that there is a real opportunity there for you to grow. Number 6 is to reach out for support. So again, I use myself as an example, and I also use my clients as examples. Sometimes what you really need is a bigger team. You need more people to help you out. Teams at work, people who can help you out professionally with actual billable work, people who can help you out in terms of mentors and sponsors, people who can help you out with things like admin or planning. There's all sorts of areas where you can seek out support for you and outside of work, right? Whether it's support at home, whether it's support with your kiddos, whether it's support with aging parents, whether it's support with, I don't know, a board that you've joined or some community involvement that you've become invested in, where sometimes you just need to ask others to help you out. So that is a lesson I am certainly applying going forward into the new year. And then finally, this focus, number 7, on building self-trust. So at the end of the day, the relationship that you have with yourself is paramount. We really want to focus on making that a really important relationship for you to have, right? I think so many times we think we don't matter, or I can take it, or it's just this once. And what I'm inviting you to consider, and it's certainly what I'm focusing on, is to follow through. The commitments that we make to ourselves are not negotiable, that we treat ourselves the same as or better than we treat others. I mean, sometimes we'll treat strangers on the street better than we treat ourselves. And I think that needs to be something that we look at, right? And find a way to develop that trust, because ultimately, when you trust yourself, you're capable of so much more. And your experience is generally much more enjoyable. So with that, I'm going to wrap up today's podcast episode. I would like to remind you that I am offering a webinar on December 15th. It is a Friday. I would love to have you there. The focus really is on creating an extraordinary year for 2024 for you to create something in your practice potentially that you've wanted to create for a long time. This could be the year that you finally, and then you get to fill it in, what you finally do, right? Something you really want to do. And also, I am offering a group coaching and mastermind program for women lawyers starting in 2024, January 2024. So again, if that's something that is of interest to you, by all means, feel free to reach out. You can go ahead and register. You'll have the link to register in the notes that go along with this podcast episode. And of course, you're always welcome to reach out to me as well. So with that, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be able to spend this time with you. And I hope that my list of takeaways for the year resonates with you, and that there are some takeaways here that you too will be able to apply to yourself in the new year. Thank you again. Have a beautiful week. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.